You won't believe what happened when Paddy Pimblett and Colby Covington finally crossed paths. After months of trash talk, heated exchanges, and bold claims, they were finally face to face. But here's the shocking part, Colby, the man who never backs down from a war of words, the fighter who built his name on controversy and bravado, did something no one expected. He looked down. He avoided eye contact. He had nothing to say. Paddy couldn't help but notice. He had been hearing Covington run his mouth for months, always quick with an insult online, always hyping himself up like he was untouchable. Yet, when the moment came, when there were no screens, no Twitter posts, no cameras rolling, Colby had no fire, no sharp words, no fight in him. Paddy, on the other hand, just smirked. He knew exactly what had happened. The moment was too real, and Covington wanted no part of it. This all went down at a Power Slap event in Las Vegas, just weeks before Paddy's biggest fight at UFC 314. He was in town for a pre-fight press conference, preparing for a war against Michael Chandler, a fight that could change his career forever. But then, out of nowhere, fate handed him this moment a chance to see Covington, the man who had thrown insult after insult, up close. And what did Covington do? Stare at the floor, acting like he didn't see Paddy standing right there. For months, Covington had been the loudest voice in the room, throwing shots at fighters left and right, stirring up drama wherever he went. He had his fair share of enemies, but Paddy? Paddy took things personally. Covington had already rubbed him the wrong way with his trash talk about Leon Edwards leading up to UFC 304, and Paddy had made it clear he didn't respect guys who talked a big game online but crumbled when it came time to back it up. Now, here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just a random run-in. Paddy had been calling for a fight with Covington. He wanted him inside the cage. He had already floated the idea of moving up to welterweight to test himself against the man he saw as nothing more than an overhyped loudmouth. And now, he had all the proof he needed that Covington wasn't who he pretended to be. No footage of this encounter has surfaced yet, but Paddy made sure to talk about it in his latest vlog. The way he described it was simple. Talks a big game online, SS his undies in person. That was it. That was all he needed to say. Covington, the self-proclaimed king of trash talk, had nothing when it really mattered. But let's take a step back for a second. Because while this little encounter might have been a side story, Paddy's focus remains locked on his upcoming war at UFC 314. His fight against Chandler isn't just another match. It's the fight that could define his future. A win here puts him in the conversation for a shot at the lightweight title. A loss? That's not an option. Paddy has already proven he belongs among the elite. His last fight saw him dismantle King Green at UFC 304. A statement victory that reminded everyone why he's one of the fastest rising stars in the sport. But Chandler is a different beast. A former title challenger, a man who thrives in chaos, someone who has no fear of stepping into deep waters and dragging his opponent down with him. This is the test Paddy has been waiting for. And he knows exactly what's on the line. If he beats Chandler, the doors swing wide open. The lightweight division is stacked with killers, but Paddy has a hit list of his own. Conor McGregor's name is on it, and so is Ilia Topuria's. That one is personal. Topuria and Paddy nearly came to blows back in London in 2022, and the tension between them has only grown since then. But what about Covington? Could this encounter spark something bigger? Could it be the start of a rivalry that leads to an all-out war inside the cage? Covington has always thrived on controversy, but this time, he might have picked the wrong guy to mess with. Because if Paddy gets past Chandler, he'll have all the momentum in the world to chase whatever fight he wants next. And let's be real, if Covington truly believes he's as great as he says he is, he'll have to prove it. Because Paddy Pimblett isn't just another fighter looking to make a name for himself. He's a fighter who's already on the verge of superstardom, and every move he makes is watched by millions. The moment Covington looked down, the moment he avoided Paddy's gaze, the moment he had no words left, it was a crack in the image he spent years building. And Paddy? He saw it. He felt it. He knew what it meant. And that's why this story isn't over. Not even close. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because if you think Paddy Pimblett is the kind of guy to just let this slide, you don't know him well enough yet. That moment, that tiny slip in Covington's confidence, that little hesitation, it was all Paddy needed. He's not the type to forget. He's not the type to let a moment like that fade into the background. No, he saw it for exactly what it was, weakness. And if there's one thing Paddy knows how to do, it's capitalize on an opponent's weakness. Back in his hotel room that night, Paddy couldn't shake the image of Covington looking down, the same guy who had screamed insults into cameras, who had hyped himself up as the biggest trash talker in the game. And now, he had crumbled in the simplest of ways by refusing to meet a man's eyes. Paddy let out a laugh, shaking his head. All that talk for nothing, he muttered. But even as he laughed, his mind was already working, already calculating what came next. Because if Covington was this scared in a hallway, what would he do under the bright lights with nowhere to hide? But before that could happen, there was still the matter of UFC 314. Michael Chandler wasn't some stepping stone. He wasn't a guy you could just look past. If anything, Chandler was the biggest challenge of Paddy's career. A veteran, an absolute savage inside the cage, and someone who wasn't afraid of the fire. If Paddy wanted a shot at Covington, if he wanted to shut up all the critics who still questioned him, he needed to take Chandler out first. The next morning, Paddy woke up early. His body still ached from the grueling training sessions he'd been pushing himself through, but none of that mattered. He went for a run through the streets of Vegas before the sun even came up, his mind locked in on one thing: winning. As he ran, he replayed the moment from the night before over and over again in his head. The way Covington looked down, the way the energy shifted. It was fuel, pure and simple. The truth was, Paddy knew what people were saying. He'd heard it all before. That he was too unpolished, that he hadn't fought the best of the best yet, that Chandler was too big of a leap. But he loved proving people wrong. It was what got him here in the first place. And now, he was just days away from another chance to do it again. At the UFC 314 press conference, the energy in the room was electric. Paddy sat next to Chandler, the two exchanging looks, both men knowing exactly what was at stake. Chandler leaned forward, microphone in hand, and smirked. "I hope you're ready for war, Paddy," he said, his voice calm but laced with intensity. Paddy grinned, shaking his head. "I've been ready, lad. This ain't new to me." The crowd erupted, the tension thick between them. This was the fight people wanted to see. A rising star against a seasoned warrior. A test that would either launch Paddy into a new stratosphere or remind everyone why Chandler had been a title contender before. But even as he sat there, staring at Chandler, there was another name lingering in his mind. Covington. The thought of it made his blood boil. He couldn't ignore it. Not now, So he took the mic, turned toward the reporters, and with a smirk, he said, "And after I deal with Chandler, I've got my eyes on a fella who fancies himself a big talker. You all know who I'm talking about." There was a murmur in the crowd, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. The cameras cut to the reporters, eager to get Covington's response. Paddy leaned back, satisfied. This wasn't just about Chandler anymore. This was about setting the stage for what came next. In the days leading up to the fight, Covington finally responded. A short clip surfaced online, just Covington sitting in his usual style, looking straight into the camera with that smug grin. "Paddy the baddie?" He scoffed. "Kid, you don't want this smoke. Stick to your little lightweight fights. This is big boy business over here." Paddy saw the clip while finishing up a late-night training session. He watched it twice, letting Covington's words sink in. Then he just shook his head and laughed. "He's rattled," he said. "I can see it. He's already making excuses." But none of that mattered yet. First, he had to take care of business at UFC 314. The night of the fight finally arrived. The arena was packed, the energy off the charts. Chandler walked out first, looking laser-focused, bouncing on his feet as he made his way to the cage. Then came Paddy. The crowd erupted as his music hit, the entire place shaking as he danced his way to the octagon, his confidence unshakable. The fight itself was a war. Chandler came out fast, throwing heavy shots, trying to impose his will early. But Paddy was ready. He moved, slipped, countered. Every time Chandler tried to push forward, Paddy had an answer. The first 2 rounds were brutal, both men landing massive shots, neither backing down. But in the third, something shifted. Paddy started finding his rhythm. His strikes were landing cleaner, his movement sharper. Chandler was slowing down, his breathing heavier. And then the moment came. A perfectly timed left hook caught Chandler flush on the jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Paddy didn't hesitate. He pounced, unloading a flurry of strikes before dragging Chandler to the ground. Within seconds, he had his back. The choke was locked in. Chandler struggled, fought, but it was too tight. Tap, tap, tap. The crowd exploded. Paddy jumped to his feet, screaming into the air, the adrenaline surging through his body. He had done it. He had beaten Michael Chandler. He had silenced the doubters. And now he was on the path to something even bigger. As Joe Rogan stepped into the cage for the post-fight interview, Paddy grabbed the mic before he could even ask a question. He turned straight to the camera, his face still dripping with sweat, his breath heavy but controlled. "Oh, Colby," he said, pointing directly at the lens. "You were looking at the floor last time. You won't be able to do that when I'm standing across from you in the cage. So what's it gonna be? You gonna keep running? Or are you gonna step up?" The arena erupted again, the challenge now official. Paddy wasn't just calling for a fight anymore, he was demanding it. And now, all eyes were on Covington. Because after that night, there was no more avoiding it. No more looking down. No more pretending. If Covington really was the man he claimed to be, he had only one choice. Step into the cage. Or prove Paddy right.